Alright, I've said it before and I'll say it again. The 80s are one of the worst decades in automotive history, just barely an improvement over the absolute travesty that was the 1970s. The cars were blocky, slow, and overall an affront to humanity, in my opinion. Now, this is a brief summary of what I said in a past video, and boy, it was taken poorly. For about a month, I received threats, insults, and even a dude that jumped through a bunch of different videos of mine just to call me a nerd. All this had me thinking, did I push too hard? Was I unfair to a decade that got so much love? Should I make a retraction? Should I eat my words? No, f you, the 1980s suck. I will gladly die on this hill. However, I did ultimately decide that it would be unfair to say that every single car from that time period was trash. For every 10 ugly cars, there was at least one diamond in the rough. So, as a peace offering, I've compiled a list to show that cars that I think are the most attractive from this time period, some of which I would even like to own. There's gonna be a stipulation though. This list will not include cars that were designed in the previous decades, as I consider those facelifts, not full 80s redesigns. So no 280Z, no 81 Trans Ams, no C3 Corvettes, or anything like that. Cause let's face it, most of these are just worse versions of the best vehicles. Ah shoot, that means I can't include the Grand National, huh? Whack. I'm actually realizing how much my list needs to be changed now. Dang it, I need to rewrite this whole script. Another stipulation is that this list is almost 100% about looks. Also, little reminder, I have a Redbubble. I take pictures of cars and throw them up there on various prints, posters, and buttons if you want it. My photos are pretty good if I do say so myself. There's a link in the description down below, and you can always start there. Number 1 is a Lamborghini Countach. I'm just playing, the car's still ugly as balls. Number 1 is the Jeep Cherokee. Now, this might be a slightly controversial take. I got no clue because I'm not very deep into the off-road world. But I absolutely love these 4x4s. Maybe it's nostalgia because I grew up seeing these everywhere, but there's just something so simplistically rugged about these vehicles. I've always fantasized about buying one, giving it a lift in some mud tires, and then taking it into the countryside and never looking back. The stock flares in these cars do a lot of the heavy lifting, as their giant squared off look really gives you the confidence that this thing can handle whatever gets thrown at it. It just looks so burly. And don't even get me started on the aftermarket for these cars. I've seen thousands of sick builds with these cars as a base. Huge tires, some floodlights, and a bull bar take these designs through the roof, and you better believe I'll be getting myself one someday. Next up is the Ferrari F40. Look, this car needs absolutely zero introduction. It's the freaking F40. Twin turbo V8 paired with a curve-hugging body, a high spoiler, and you've got something that was destined to adorn many a young man's wall in the form of a poster. The F40 is one of those cars that's legendary, and if you ever see one on the street, you should probably buy a lottery ticket because these things are rare. So rare, in fact, that when one crashes, it's actually considered news. Way to screw it up for everybody, dealership jockey. This car looks incredible. Its giant slope nose, high spoiler, and vents galore truly give it a feeling that it's an aerodynamic beast. And for those of you that love them, they of course include pop-ups if you're into that sort of thing. I know I'm not. The engine also sounds absolutely incredible, like nothing anybody's ever heard. Not exactly LFA level, but come on, you'd have to be insane not to like a high revving V8. The F40 left it out on the floor, being one of the last cars to not include any driving assistance modes. ABS? Gone. Air conditioning? Don't need it. A radio? You got the engine to listen to. Hell, even the paint was skimped out on for the purpose of saving weight. You could actually see the Kevlar through it. And no, I didn't misspeak. They use Kevlar in the creation of this car. The F40 is a legend of the automotive world, and even though it comes from the 80s, it deserves to be remembered, to the surprise of absolutely nobody. Okay, so third is the Audi Quattro. Y'all know which one. The Audi Quattro is known for one thing and one thing only, Group B. One of the few good things to come out of the auto industry in the 80s was the short-lived Group B rally division, which, as stupid and dangerous as it was a lot of fun to see. And the star of that division was that Quattro. 0 to 60 in around 2 to 3 seconds on gravel is insane. However hard it is to do so, let's ignore the legendary racing capabilities for a second, just focus on how cool the car is itself. Now looking at this car, I see it as everything I traditionally dislike. It's boxy, it's got sharp edges, yada yada yada, but somehow, in this formation together, I can't help but love it. It somehow gives the air of a family car mixed with a sports car. Maybe it's just me and I can't stop seeing the racing beast inside, but there's just something very subtly intimidating about this car. It also lends itself to resto mods very well, and with a half-decent aftermarket and a bit of creativity, you could drive next to a Lamborghini and still turn heads. It doesn't sound half bad either. Next up, and one of my favorites on this list, is the E30 BMW M3. Now, I am not a Euro guy by any means, but when I tell you that a European car actually looks good, you should probably listen, because I hate those by default most of the time, except the Jaguar F-Type. I love the Jaguar F-Type. The E30 M3 is just the epitome of the 80s done right. It's sharp but not jagged, squared but not boxy, and it knows how to play with the angles just right to keep it from being a boring car. I particularly enjoy the nose, which is kind of built like a cliff. Comes down an angle just to flatten out at the bumper. If I know the history right, this car is basically just a standard 3 Series they brought in redesigned with racing in mind. Even the C-pillars were changed ever so subtly to slightly improve the aero. The car came with a 4-banger that would make any V8 guy blush, and despite the fact that it's missing 4 cylinders, it sounds pretty dang good. I don't care how many cylinders you got, if you can rev past 6,500, it's gonna sound awesome. This Beamer is living proof that while Americans were struggling during the 70s and 80s, Europe was doing just fine and enjoying quality cars that would become instant classics when they came stateside. The M3 is a marvel both in the looks and the racing department. Little turnaround here, we got the Ford 7th Gen F-Series. Honestly, the square bodies could have easily just had this spot, but my personal preference for the F-Series did just enough to bring me to the dark side. Trucks are probably the only vehicles that looked better during the 80s. Unlike passenger cars, in my opinion, trucks are supposed to be burly and boxy, and the 80s just dialed that to 11. You pair any truck in that time period with some big old mud bogging tires, and you can create something that looks like a workhorse. And out of all the workhorses, you need your Clydesdale. Something a big, burly beast that looks like it can haul loads the other ones can't. The 80s F-150s just scream beef. It's one of those rare vehicles from the 80s that I genuinely want to own one day, probably because of that big chrome grille. Next up, we got the Ferrari 288. Now this is a weird car, but in all the good ways. The 288 is just such a timeless masterpiece, and I mean timeless. The car looks like it could have come out today, save for a couple parts here and there like the pop-ups. Unlike most other cars from this era, the 288 isn't boxy in the least. Minus the very front, there isn't a sharp angle on this car. It just flows so smoothly from front to back. It's like looking at a work of art. Now I could gush about the looks all day, but let's talk motor. The thing made 650 horsepower in the 80s. For that time period, that kind of power was a pipe dream for enthusiasts unless they really wanted to sacrifice drivability. 5 seconds. That's all it took you to get to freeway speeds. The 288 was an absolute beast both in the looks and performance department. And frankly, it's a massive shame that it gets overlooked for the F40 so often because it's just wow. Next up, Porsche 959. Now this thing was the muse for the F40. Do you know how badass of a car you need to be to have Enzo Ferrari himself say, we need to build a car specifically to beat this car? The 959 walked the talk as well, as its 2.8 liter turbocharged flat 6 pushed it to a blistering 197 miles per hour, taking the title of fastest car from Ferrari himself. It looks great on a poster, too. This thing has a huge cult following, especially because it looks like a 911 on steroids, or that it got stung by a bee, depends on who you ask. If you ask me, the only color for this car is silver. Screw the Porsche red, I like a silver bullet. The 959 is an absolute icon, and to this day, you're still gonna find people arguing about which car is better, this or the F40. I'm gonna go with the Porsche because you could order it with air conditioning. And now, for the last one, is it really a surprise? It's the Pontiac Trans Am, aka Kit from Knight Rider. The 80s Trans Am is absolutely iconic. While not as fast as a Corvette, they shared a lot of the same styling cues, including the sloped front end, the fastback type window, and of course the pop-ups. Now yes, the Corvette was faster, and most people would think, okay, then it's automatically better. I'm gonna disagree, because for half the price you can get a car that looks very similar, and it has a very tunable engine. Plus, I kinda just like the look a little bit more. I'm sorry, Corvette fanboys, that's just how it goes. The Pontiac Trans Am from the 80s is an absolute icon that checked all the boxes. Oddly enough, I'm a big fan of the interior as well, which is a rare effect for an 80s car to have on me. There's just something insanely cool about an interior that gives airplane cockpit vibes. And that's all I got for this list. I wish I could have included all the cars from the 80s that I like the National, the 280Z, the V8 Vantage, and more, but unfortunately those were all originally released in the 70s and just had some minor stylistic updates in this decade. I'll level with you though. This list was hard to make, just my opinion, but the 80s is very slim pickings for cool cars, especially ones that were affordable to the common man. But, like I said earlier, it wouldn't be fair if I said everything from this decade was garbage. Hope you all enjoyed. Remember to like and subscribe, yada yada yada. Remember to check out the Redbubble, and I hope you all have a great day. Peace.